Hello and welcome to this revision video for the power of nature with a focus on the Prelude and Ozymandias. In this video we will be looking at the following question. Compare the ways poets present the power of nature in the Prelude and one other poem from Power and Conflict. We will begin by mind vomiting some ideas about the power of nature across the anthology, and then we'll zoom in on the Prelude and Ozymandias, with a particular focus on exploring the romantic idea of the sublime. We will map out an essay plan, zoom in on some key quotations, and then finish with a model paragraph. As you watch, take lots of notes and pause to have a go at parts of the analysis by yourself. Bring in any practice paragraphs to be marked, and happy revising. So, let's start by mind vomiting what we know about the power of nature in these four poems: the Prelude, Storm on the Island, Ozymandias, and Exposure. Pause the video now and have a go. For the Prelude, you should be aware of how it examines the power of nature over the speaker's emotions, evoking a disconcerting and unsettling perspective. It presents a sense of fear and awe at the scale of nature, but also its beauty. For Storm on the Island, you should be aware of how it explores the power of nature over communities, presenting nature as violent. It explores both the isolation experienced by those on the island, but also their unity due to the weather. Ultimately, the poem can be examined allegorically as a reflection of the troubles in Northern Ireland. For Exposure, we know that it explores the power of nature over soldiers, depicting nature as violent and cruel. It presents nature as an enemy, exposing the reality of World War I and the futility of war. Finally, for Ozymandias, we know that it demonstrates the power of nature to destroy, suggesting that nature will always outlast human tyranny and control. It reveals that despite the power of man to control, nature will always erode its legacy. Like the Prelude, it evokes a sense of fear and awe at the sheer power of nature. We have talked in lessons previously about Romanticism and its focus on looking inwards and examining the power of nature. As an extension of this, let us consider the literary concept of the sublime. A literary concept is any idea associated with literature, such as the concept of a martyr, which we associate with tragedies. The sublime is associated with Romanticism. It was defined in the 18th century by Edmund Burke in terms of vastness, terror, and beauty. The sublime is a fusion of ideas and feelings, both a sense of things being overwhelmingly big, evoking shock and fear, but also a sense of wonder at its beauty. These feelings are often experienced by man through nature. Romantic poets saw the sublime as an emotional response to the physical grandeur of nature. It was an emotional feeling that echoed the sheer power, force, terror, and beauty of nature itself, like an internal storm of fear and wonder. Wordsworth himself defined the sublime in one of his essays, and he defined it as the mind trying to grasp at something towards which it can make approaches, but which it is incapable of attaining. In other words, the sublime is the mind attempting to understand and feel what it sees, but is never quite able to, because of the sheer power of what it beholds. We can, for the purpose of our essays then, boil it down to finding a sense of shock and awe in nature's beauty, but also its terror, and allowing both experiences to affect your emotions. To help you understand the sublime, have a look at this artistic representation of the movement. Write down a few ways it reflects the ideas we've just looked at. Consider how it is less interested in capturing the realism of nature, making it seem real, but tries to capture a feeling associated with it, one that is not necessarily beautiful, but is powerful and awe-inducing. What about this image? Notice the juxtaposition between light and dark, as in the previous image, presenting the power of nature in all its forms. It almost seems angry and violent, but the light captures a sense of wonder and beauty. Remember that these contrasting ideas of light and dark can be found in the Prelude and Ozymandias too. Okay, so we now need to look at the Prelude, and we've decided to compare it with Ozymandias because this will allow us to examine the sublime in both poems. If we can talk about the sublime, this is a sophisticated grade 9 literary concept. Let's map out an overall essay plan, drawing on language, form and structure. We will centre our argument around the sublime, using this as our main point of comparison. Both poems evoke a sense of the sublime, conveying a sense of awe and terror at nature's power. We will then separate the poems by exploring how the Prelude focuses on the power of nature over the emotions of an individual, a young boy, whereas Ozymandias presents the power of nature in contrast to the fallibility of the power of man. Everything we look at and write will come back to these three central ideas. For language, in the Prelude, we will focus on Wordsworth's descriptions of nature's power. For Ozymandias, we will focus on Shelley's description of nature's vastness. For structure, we'll focus on the juxtaposition in the Prelude of nature's beauty and its terror, and how the poem is structured to show the speaker's discovery of nature. For Ozymandias, we will focus on the changing perspectives and how these evoke nature's vast power. For form, we will focus on the Prelude's epic, without stanzas, and how these try to echo nature's overwhelming power. For Ozymandias, we will focus on Shelley's subverted rhyme scheme, arguing that as the sonnet is man's creation, nature has even broken its structure. Okay, so let's zoom in now on some key quotations that we could use in this essay. For each quotation, pause the video and try to explode it yourself first. What does it suggest about the power of nature? How does it link to the sublime? Wordsworth's perception of nature's power is arguably indescribable at points, when the child speaker describes the huge peak black and huge. We know this line is in contrast with some of the more vivid and literary language elsewhere in the poem, and so it's worth deconstructing its effect. Let us start with the repetition of the adjective huge. The fact that Wordsworth cannot seem to find a better word to describe its size suggests that the speaker is almost speechless, and suggests that man cannot articulate nature's power. It is as though there is no word that can truly capture the vast size of the peak, as though it is beyond human comprehension. This perfectly reflects Wordsworth's own definition of the sublime as something that man is incapable of attaining. Similarly, the adjective is arguably an example of euphemistic language, suggesting that man cannot comprehend the vastness of nature. It's too big, too vast, too awe-inducing for both the child and us to truly understand. Finally, the adjective black is symbolic for nature's terror and the speaker's fear at this point of the poem. We know that the sublime is a fusion of awe and terror, and the darkness here is a good example of its power to elicit a deep and unsettling mood and atmosphere. Another example where language is used to reflect nature's power and the sublime is when Wordsworth describes how the grim shape towered up between me and the stars. Firstly, the juxtaposition between the dark and sinister adjective grim and the more enchanting, majestic reference to the stars emphasises how nature has the power to instill both fear and wonder. The speaker here is experiencing an internal conflict, where his previous love and almost worship of nature is being challenged by his terror. The use of prepositions in this line with the words up and between evoke an image of the speaker's isolation and loneliness, evoking a desolate mood that reflects the child's changing feelings about nature. It is as though the enchantment and beauty and wonder of nature is being pulled away and hidden by the discovery of nature's power to instill fear. Finally, the metaphor towered evokes an image of the peak rising up dramatically, conjuring a sense of its size as threatening and foreboding. The reader is positioned from the speaker's perspective, and we begin to imagine the sheer scale of the mountain, thus feeling the speaker's sense of awe at its quickly growing stature. Now let's think about the use of language in Ozymandias. Let's focus on Shelley's description of setting and how this is used to evoke the power of nature and a sense of the sublime. Shelley uses a semantic field of destruction throughout the poem, shattered, wreck, decay, which evokes nature's power to destroy. Nature in this poem is shown to destroy all of man's creations, including both the statue, a physical representation of arrogance, and power. It suggests that power is a creation just like the sculpture. We create our own power and have the arrogance to believe in it, only for nature to tear it down over time with just wind and sand. Shelley's use of the adjective colossal is also significant. Not only does it emphasise the sheer scale of the statue and its destruction, it is arguably also ironic. It is nature that has destroyed the statue, and so it is nature that is left standing. It is nature that is actually colossal. This idea of nature as a destructive force does elicit a sense of awe and terror from readers, and both the reader and speaker are left with a sense of wonder at its magnitude and size. We could argue that the power itself in this poem is an example of the sublime too, if we are to go by Wordsworth's definition. He said that the sublime was the mind's attempt to reach for something it can never attain. Shelley seems to suggest that power is something man can only reach for, but can never truly hold. Finally, the use of alliteration in this line, with the adjectives boundless and bare, elongate the line, evoking nature's vast and unceasing power. These alliterative patterns continue with the poem's last line, where the adjectives lone and level create a cadence, a rhythm that echoes the boundless desert landscape. The sound patterns create an impression of nature, specifically the desert, disappearing into the horizon with no clear boundary. Similarly, the sibilance in sands and stretch elongates the line, conjuring an image of the desert's vast size. The reader is being made to feel as insignificant as Ozymandias himself, but also as insignificant as the speaker in the prelude. We are tiny against nature's huge scale and force. Finally, the adverb far away conjures a sense of mystery and enigma, as though nature's power can never be truly known. It is incomprehensible, continuing endlessly, thus suggesting man is arrogant to ever think that it has true power. Okay, so now let's move on and think about the structure of the prelude and how this also reflects the power of nature and ideas about the sublime. The prelude is structured to evoke a juxtaposition between the speaker's initial ideas of nature as something beautiful, offering an exciting troubled pleasure, and then the speaker's discovery that nature is terrifying. This change in mood and atmosphere positions the reader to experience the speaker's gradually increasing awe and wonder. Where the boys seem to understand nature as something comforting and safe at the beginning of the poem, he discovers that he does not understand it at all, and is left shaken by its magnitude. This emotional journey that both the speaker and the reader are taken on reflects the speaker's wider discoveries of youth, perhaps. Just like he discovers nature's power to instill fear, he discovers life's power to instill fear too. He loses his innocence throughout this extract, gaining a deeper and darker perspective of nature and the world. The structure of Ozymandias also reflects ideas about the sublime, particularly regarding the sense of it being truly incomprehensible and unattainable. The changing perspectives from the narrator to the traveller to the voice of Ozymandias himself evokes a sense of enigma and mystery, as though the reader only experiences fragments of each perspective as they are lost in the vastness of time and nature. The embedded voices in the poem present a sense of ambiguity, and when we reach Ozymandias' voice, it is almost ghostly and unearthly. The fact that the story of Ozymandias and the statue only reaches the narrator through the traveller, who only himself knows it from the broken statue, creates an impression of Ozymandias' legacy becoming lost to time, as though nature's destruction of the statue is destroying Ozymandias altogether. Finally, Wordsworth utilises the epic form in the prelude. The epic is conventionally, typically, a long poem that features heroic adventures. Here, it is used to mirror the vastness of nature, revealing that Wordsworth's experience of the sublime is complex and emotionally challenging or arduous. The lack of breaks in the stanza creates a breathless, relentless tone, as though nature's power is inescapable and its true scale incomprehensible. The poem is in blank verse, which is typical for the epic poem, as made characteristic by the poet John Milton. We can therefore call this a Miltonic blank verse. Here it is used to mirror the significance of nature. It is worthy of an epic poem in conventional Miltonic blank verse. Shelley, however, uses the form of the sonnet in Ozymandias. The sonnet is conventionally a poem of high praise or love, and so perhaps Shelley is using the form ironically, or perhaps he is using it in order to praise nature's power. It is as though nature is the object of Shelley's affection in the poem. Furthermore, Shelley subverts typical Petrarchan or Shakespearean sonnet rhyme schemes, perhaps suggesting that nature has destroyed another of man's creations, and its power becomes palpable. The subverted rhyme scheme shatters the sonnet form, as nature has shattered the statue's visage. So, let's remind ourselves how we'll write about this. We know that there are 7 aspects to our analytical writing, but when we're comparing poetry, we need to begin with a both however introduction. We'll then have our thesis, our evidence, we'll explain it in as much detail as we can before moving on to analyse techniques, zooming in on the language and zooming back out on the writer's ideas and context. Both poems evoke a sense of the sublime, conveying a sense of awe and terror at nature's power. However, the prelude examines nature's power over the emotions of an individual, whereas Ozymandias presents the power of nature in contrast to the fallibility of the power of man. Wordsworth emphatically evokes nature's power through the fusion of repetition and adjectives, when the speaker describes the mountain as having a huge peak, black and huge. The simplicity of the speaker's language is in contrast with the more vivid descriptions elsewhere in the poem, and so suggests that the speaker is almost speechless, unable to find the words to describe nature's size and scale and its effect on his feelings. Wordsworth's use of repetition and adjectives evokes an almost euphemistic tone, where the speaker cannot comprehend or articulate nature's vast power. It is as though the speaker is searching for a word that can come close to depicting his own emotional experience, but relinquishes when he realises that it is impossible. The adjective black is symbolic for the speaker's experience of terror in the face of nature's untamed power. It conjures a sinister and foreboding mood for the reader, as we too are in awe at nature. Wordsworth's depiction of nature is reflective of the romantic sublime, where the speaker comes close to but is ultimately unable to explain or comprehend nature's true power. Wordsworth is evoking the sublime by presenting nature as something awe-inducing, but also terrifying, and the speaker seems to struggle to assimilate both of these feelings. Similarly, in Ozymandias, and then we'd continue. So, here's our plan again. You need to use this, as well as the model paragraph, to now draft your own response to our question. Remember that any practice paragraphs you complete, bring them in for marking, and otherwise, happy revising.